Guys, welcome to this week's episode of the Thinking Podcast. This is your host, Geoffrey Woo, and I'm excited to have Dr. Priyanka Wali here with me. Interesting story of how we met. It was at the World's Fair SF, and I gave a talk a little bit about biohacking, and part of the talk was about talking about keto, low-carb, high-fat diets, ketosis, and I met you in the context of you being a comedian.
Yeah.
You also happen to actually be a fully licensed practicing doctor. Curious to hear about that story.
Yeah, so the reason I was at the conference was because there was a comedy show happening at the conference. Right. It's called Eureka, and it's a science-based comedy show. So I was one of the comedy commentators for the scientist that was there. So I was killing time, basically, and I saw like the roster of different talks, and I just walked in and sat down, and then you came up. I think I saw like the second half of your spiel, and you were like preaching to my choir when I was listening to you, and I was like, where am I? And I was like, I have to introduce myself to this guy. And so it was kind of funny because I had all my comedy cards with me.
Right.
Like I had none of my like medicine business cards. So I'm like, look, I'm here for comedy, but I am actually a keto physician. And like, I totally get what you're doing. I think it's awesome. And that, I think it was a really cool story how we met. And then you connected me to Manny.
Yes. So Manny is a clinician who's also been on our podcast a couple of times around... I think there's just an emerging group of physicians who are looking at the existing care system and being like, some of the basic biochemistry doesn't quite make sense. It's not making sense from a textbook level as well as a practice level. Let's see what how to improve the system. And I think there's like a really quickly growing group of practitioners and clinicians that are starting to have their like light bulbs turned on here.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. After Manny and I met, and then we like powwowed, and we shared thoughts and whatnot. It was great to connect with him.
And I think recently, Melia Robinson from Business Insider has been covering this broad beat of biohacking, and she approached me asking, "Hey, I want to try this ketogenic diet that I hear that all these Silicon Valley execs are doing," and I was like, "Hey, like." Dr. Wali's, up to speed on this. Talk to her, and then she can be sort of your guide into this world. And it sounds like that was one of her most viewed articles, and I think that just also speaks broadly to the interest that everyone has around biohacking and ketosis.
Yeah, for sure. And it's funny because when I first met Melia, she was a little skeptical. She was like, "What is this?
Is it insane?" Because like the current dogma is like. Fat is not good.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll let you explain it.
Exactly. Yeah. So, but then when I first met with her, I went through like her entire medical history, and I was like, look, there's no like absolute medical indication for you to be on this. So I need you to understand that like in my practice, I'm putting patients who need to be on this, like people with diabetes, prediabetes, metabolic syndrome, fatty liver, polycystic ovarian syndrome, you name it.
Right.
And so I was like, this is helping a lot of people. So whatever you're going to write, you need to make sure you don't bash this, because this is actually helping a lot of people. This is treating people. I'm getting people off meds. Like, I sat her down and I was very like, look, you don't have a medical indication to do this. So if you're going to do this, like, you need to be respectful of like what's going on here
on the therapeutic side.
Yeah, because this is helping a lot of people.
Right.
So after I kind of explained that to her, I think she was much more like appreciative and mindful.
Right.
And then we also didn't go immediately like into hardcore ketosis like overnight. I realized like we should wean her into it and gently kind of put her in ketosis, which we did. And you can read the article.
Yeah, we'll link to the article.
Yeah, the article's awesome. She did a great job
of complying,
talking about it. Yeah, I think the only there was a little Twitter flack that I got from some other physicians that aren't really familiar with it. But I straightened that out. Like there were a couple of comments like, are we promoting weight loss or are we promoting health? And I was like, dude, it clearly said in the article that I told her that this wasn't an absolute medical indication for her to do this.
Right.
Like, this was an N of 1 experiment that was just like documented.
Right.
You know, and I don't think ketogenic diet is for everyone. I am not the type of person that's like, this is the world's diet.
Yeah. I think that's like an important thing to explain and talk about. Like when we talk about from a therapeutic use case to an enhancement use case or a biohacker's use case, a lot of these are subjective, N equals 1. Like you should be measuring your own biometrics and their own experiences with it.
Exactly.
I mean, I think it's overly prescriptive on the other side to be like, okay, let's go away from low fat, let's eat a ton of fat. I think that's equally as dogmatic as like the current system.
Totally.
Like let's not make the same mistake like twice.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. I think it's important to be skeptical, like always, right? It was really cool, like following Melia. Like we would touch base via text, but then meet in person, and yeah, a couple weeks into it, like she just seemed so much happier. She was like glowing, and yeah, like it was.
Yeah, I
really
saw her.
nice.
Yeah, I saw her recently, and she was saying that she just felt a lot better.
Yeah.
Which I think is a lot of the subjective feeling that a lot of our community members that are on keto or playing with fasting feel, and I think that's why it's like a growing movement where it's like hey, you know, it's something that you can do. That's something that's free and something that relatively free in terms of like, you know, you're just going to spend money on food anyways.
Totally.
And people are seeing good results from it.
Yeah, no, I like I say, you know, if you have diabetes or pre-diabetes, I mean, it's a pretty strong, if not absolute indication.
Yeah, I'm curious, like before diving into like the weeds into the, you know, the indications, I'm curious how your background, your history into this. I mean, I think
I discovered it.
Yeah, because I think a lot of clinicians, doctors that I talk to, you know, they go through medical school and residency with the existing dogma of ADA sort of requirements, and that's very different from what we're seeing in practice in terms of results. So I'm curious to hear your background, your story there.
So it's actually pretty interesting because you know, in med school, I was a good little med student. I followed on myself the American Heart Association guidelines, the American Diabetes Association guidelines. I was eating a low-fat, lacto-ovo vegetarian diet. I thought animal fats were bad.
Where'd you go to medical school?
USC in Los Angeles. I
grew up near LA.
Yeah, and I was the good little med student.
Yeah.
I thought I was doing this because I was kind of reducing my risk of heart disease. Mind you, I was hungry. I was hungry all the time. I just thought hunger was a part of life. I just accepted it. Yeah. So then, flash forward, I'm in residency here in San Francisco. I'm looking to moonlight, and I just need to make some extra money so I can pay rent.
What was your residency or your specialty at this
internal
point?
medicine.
Okay.
Yeah, internal medicine. I did it at California Pacific Medical Center. So I'm like a scrappy resident on a resident salary. I'm trying to make rent. So I'm looking for moonlighting opportunities. And I come across this weight loss clinic. And this clinic is basically putting these patients on what are called VLCDs, or very low calorie diets.
Okay.
So they're feeding these patients like meal packets, and they're eating about 800 calories a day. And these guys are losing like massive quantities of weight. And they're actually getting put in ketosis, but I didn't like put it together at the time. One thing I did know was that with these VLCD programs, majority of these patients, once they stopped the program, ended up gaining the weight back,
They spike up, yeah.
So I knew, like, okay, you can lose a bunch of weight by getting on this VLCD, but
it's like starvation, kind of. It's like, yeah,
it's ketosis.
Right.
But it's not sustainable. Like,
Right.
you can't eat these packets for the rest of your life, like these little like meal packets and shakes, like very processed, like very American. You know what I
Right.
mean? Like totally
And it
packaged.
just also, like, if you're also just eating calorically restricted, it slows down your metabolism, right?
Exactly. So I got really interested with like weight loss and obesity medicine because of that experience as a resident. So then I graduated. I went into practice. And again, I was doing everything by the book, like a good little attending, following the ADA recommendations. And I started to notice that all of my patients with diabetes, like, they didn't feel good. They weren't getting better. I mean, they were just sort of staying sick. Every time I put them on insulin, they would gain weight. They felt terrible. Their blood pressure would go up. And I was kind of like, what the hell is going on? Like, I'm doing everything by the book. Their numbers are getting a little better, but like
they're really stagnating.
They feel bad.
They're just stagnating.
They're stagnating. Right. And so I was like, okay, I need to figure this out. I was already into like understanding weight loss and ketosis because of the VLCD, but I knew there wasn't a maintenance answer in that. So I started then looking for other options. So then I went back to the literature. I started speaking to other physicians that had experience with weight loss. And then I discovered the science behind low carb diets, ketogenic diet. And the first time I heard about the ketogenic diet, I mean, the science made sense to me,
right?
But it was so outlandish, the idea of eating so much fat.
Right.
I was like, okay, scientifically, this all checks, but
culturally, it's just kind of like, whoa.
Dogmatically, it's like the opposite of what everything I've been told. So at that time, mind you, I was lacto-ovo-vegetarian. I was like, you know what? I'm convinced that I should put my patients on this, but I better try it on myself first, because if God forbid there are any reactions, like if I have a heart attack,
first.
like I can recover from it. I'm pretty young, like I'll just do it. So initially when I started doing keto, because I was vegetarian, I was doing vegetarian keto. And I started...
That's not easy to do,
It wasn't easy at all. Like, it was actually really hard.
So what were you eating?
So I was eating tons of eggs and cheese. And cheese. And
avocados?
Like, something happened in my brain. I cut the carbs, and something switched. I was like, I need to eat meat. But I felt so like weird about, I hadn't eaten meat for years, so I was really like confused about it. So I actually gateway transitioned with oysters.
Huh.
And like I had to talk myself into it, because I read this article on Slate, which was published like 7 years ago, talking about how you can be vegan and still eat oysters, because from an environmental standpoint, it's still sustainable. And oysters have like very poorly developed nervous systems, so it's even debatable whether or not they feel pain. So I like created all these justifications. So then I ate oysters, and oh my God, when I ate oysters, it was like if I just started to feel like even better.
Right.
So then oysters, then I transitioned to mussels, then fish, then everything, and now I eat everything. Right. So then I went full keto in terms of like increasing my meat intake. And what I started to notice is I just felt better and better and better. And mind you, at the time, like I was doing stand-up comedy as a resident, then I graduated. So I would work in the clinic all day, and then I would perform at night doing shows. And before I went keto, I was exhausted.
Right.
In fact, during my lunch break at 1 p.m., I would go to my car to lay down for 20 minutes. And I just thought, I'm just grinding too hard. You know what I mean? I thought I was just working too hard. I switched to keto, and the first thing I noticed is that I don't need those damn naps anymore.
Your energy is consistent throughout the entire day. Yeah.
And I could work during the day, and then I would perform at night. And I'd be tired because I would be like, still like not sleeping as much, but it was clear to me that my sustainability like totally changed.
Yep.
So then once I was like, I put myself on it, I was like, I'm totally fine. And by the way, like my cholesterol numbers, like the ratios all improved. I didn't have any like metabolic syndrome to begin with, but like my hemoglobin A1C went from like 5.4 to 5.0.
Okay.
And then my cholesterol ratios all improved. Like they just got more optimal.
And to give a sense, the pre-diabetic range for H1BAC is
it's 5.7 or above.
Right.
Yeah. So
and then diabetes like 6.2.
6.5 or higher is diabetes. Yeah. So then I started putting my patients on it, and very quickly within a few months, like my practice started to become so much more satisfying, because I was like getting people off meds, cutting their insulin down, if not cutting it off. People were losing weight. People felt better.
Right.
They were thanking me. I was getting more hugs than I ever got in the clinic. And like what's funny is that a lot of my staff like secretly started eating low carb without telling me, and they look great now. It was awesome. Like, it was very cool.
Right.
And now here I am. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a crazy story. I mean, I think to be a devil's advocate, I mean, I've heard of some people that see, increases in triglycerides, cholesterol, and it seems to me that there is probably some genetic or some factor there that's, for some people. I've also heard the other on some people where it doesn't affect their fatty acids.
So typically you'll see triglyceride levels go down, and that's typically a sign that circulating fat in the bloodstream is being utilized for
As
ketosis.
energy. Yeah.
So typically triglyceride levels go down, but you can see elevations in like total cholesterol, like isolated total cholesterol. Sometimes LDL does go up, but you want to look at your LDL particle size, because just because the total LDL goes up doesn't necessarily mean that the particle size ratios have become adversely affected.
Right.
So I usually don't, if someone's actually eating like a true nutritionally adequate ketogenic diet, we typically actually see drops in triglyceride,
Right.
but you can see elevations in total
Yeah.
cholesterol and LDL.
Yeah, and I think
And
that's
I agree with you that
yeah.
it could be a genetic thing.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's why I think it's important to, on the biohacking side, actually measure these things.
Absolutely.
Right? Because like if you're not measuring, you're just kind of shooting in the dark.
For
But if you're
sure.
just actually seeing your numbers improve, your metrics improve across all boards, I mean, I think there's at some level, just trade-offs, right? I think the body wants designed to stay in homeostasis, right? So if you're just pushing levers around, you might, shift other things in different directions. I think it's like finding an overall balance that makes sense for oneself.
And, I've talked to Steve Finney about a couple of my patients whose cholesterol went up in the
Right.
past, just to kind of run it by him. And what's funny is that we tend to see these elevations in like young, healthy males who don't have metabolic syndrome. Those are usually the ones that I notice that their cholesterol levels go up.
Right.
And you could like check a ferritin level. Sometimes if their ferritin is too high, I mean, maybe they are eating too much meat.
Right.
That is possible. And then I remember this one guy from Argentina. I put him on a low carb diet because he had fatty liver. And his cholesterol numbers did go up, and I checked a ferritin. His ferritin was slightly elevated, and I
Right.
was like, how much meat are you eating? He's like, well, dude, I'm from Argentina. Like,
I'm just
I'm
eating
eating
steaks.
like all the time. And
Right.
I was like, look, take it a little easy. You
Yeah.
don't need to eat so many steaks, you
Yeah.
know? So,
I think that's like a good point. I think it is very hard to stick to a true keto diet. I think a lot of people overweight protein too much. And as you know, protein breaks down to amino acids, which turns into sugar
yeah.
through gluconeogenesis. So I think that's the process in which, okay, like, it's not like, hey, just eat steaks all the time. If you're eating steaks all the time, you're not going to be like truly ketotic. Like measure your blood ketones. You're probably not going to be that high.
Yeah, and I still don't understand why some people can tolerate high amounts of protein, whereas others can't.
Right.
It's not across the board. Like,
Right.
there are some people that eat tons of protein and their insulin levels won't necessarily be affected.
Right.
So I don't understand that. But I think it's very cool that we're so individualized. Because
Right.
that's the one thing about, I feel like good medicine is individualized medicine.
Of
like,
course.
you can't apply these guidelines to every single person, which drives me nuts, because right now our healthcare system, which is insurance-based, managed care, it's all based off of these generalized guidelines,
And these guidelines are built on clinical trials that are primarily white, like Americans,
That's
right? Because
so true.
that's what the clinical trials are done on.
That's
like
so
it's not
true.
just it's just like there's not a like clearly there's probably some genetic difference in reactions from an Asian population, an Indian population, a black population, right? So
Absolutely.
like a lot of the clinical trials and the meds are done because like the sample sizes tend to just be of like a certain demographic. So I think there is
That's
some
so true.
like position to be
Medicine is
refined.
racist, everybody.
I don't think. Yeah. I mean, I think it actually is. I don't think it's like from a malicious perspective.
For
like
sure.
most psychology studies are designed on 18 to 22-year-old college psychology students, because that is the population that signs up for these trials.
That's so true.
And these are not like a malicious perspective. It's just like clinical trials are hard to run. And what are the easiest samples to run them on? Well, it's like whoever's available.
For
and in
sure.
America, where most of the clinical trials are done, that's going to be Caucasian American of a certain, social economic status.
For
That is just what
sure.
it is. But I think that doesn't mean, okay, that's like the one size fits all. Like, let's get smarter. Let's realize this is like an institutional construct
Yeah.
and get smart about it.
Yeah, yeah. I.e. more research with more diverse populations,
Yeah.
for sure. And this doesn't just apply to like metabolic health. I mean, even in psychiatry, for example, lots of different studies that have been done out there tend to be done with like, middle class white people.
Yeah.
So it's that's very interesting.
And a lot of the trials are also done in men. Like, I think it's another thing that men and women, most of the clinical trials are done in men. As again, seeing results is already hard enough, and for certain indications, women have menstrual cycles, and that's gonna, if people are on different cycles, that affects a lot of things. It's more complicated to net that out.
For sure.
So a lot of the trials are done in men, right? So like, it's like you can slice the bias on a lot of these trials in a lot of different ways.
For sure, which is why, again, it's very important whenever you read something in the news, like check the sources, go to the original journal article, read like the
but people aren't going to read. So I think that's why it takes more and more people like us in the community out there to educate themselves and help educate people around them.
That's so true.
Yeah.
That's true. We got to get rid of all those alternative facts out there.
Yeah. In terms of like ketogenic diets, have you also looked at like fasting? I mean, they're essentially attacking the same issue of raising ketones, just in different pathways.
For sure.
I'm just curious, in terms of all the levers in your practice, how do you play with all the different levers?
Yeah. So, and I know you're like big on fasting and stuff, which is awesome. So sometimes I'll use intermittent fasting in certain patients with diabetes as an adjunct therapy,
right?
Meaning they're like already eating low carb, and I might implement that as an adjunct if, let's say, they're plateauing,
right?
Some patients ask me about fasting, and I tell them if they want to do it, go for it.
Right.
I definitely I tailor it. Like I won't approach it unless I feel like a patient would be open to it.
Right.
Yeah, because like you don't want to. It's already so hard eating keto in the food environment we live in. To then add fasting if someone's still like struggling with eating keto. I mean, if they're open to it, then that's awesome.
Yeah.
I just kind of meet people where they're at, basically. Yeah.
That makes sense. I mean, I think it's definitely like, if you have to fight your culture battles one at a time, right? If we're saying like, hey, fast, don't cut out all the yummy pastas. I know. It's like, oh, I can only do one thing at a time.
I know. But some people are really open to it. And I
think some people are just like, shit, I'm like fucking dying.
For sure.
Like, I want to fix myself. I want to try everything.
Yeah. Which is always like, if people are motivated, I mean, that's huge. That's really awesome. And like I think it can be more helpful if you have like a buddy, or if families are doing it together. What's interesting is that like in a lot of major religions, fasting has been a part of certain religious activities, like Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism. Like there's a lot of various
like Jesus
sects.
Or Moses like fasted in the Bible for like 40 days. Yeah, I mean,
that's
almost
true.
every single tradition. Which
I think is really interesting. Like why or how that came about. Came out.
Yeah, I think just looking at the literature, there was stories about Aristotle or Plato asking their new students to fast before coming to the academy, because fasting like purified their spirit and like made them smarter to absorb more material. It's interesting.
Oh, so like maybe they were in ketosis and they could have like more fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the theory, right?
For sure.
And I think some of the interesting biochemistry there is that I don't know if you've seen the literature, but like ketones are actually burned 28% more efficiently than glucose per same unit of oxygen, right? So there's actually interesting from a biochemistry level that these alternate fuel source for the brain actually shows different power generation per same unit of oxygen.
So like in India, where my family's from, like in North India, Kashmir, there's like these stories of these like super like wise spiritual guys that would go to the mountains, and they would like essentially fast and not eat, and then they would kind of talk about the stuff that they learned, and they would pass down all this wisdom. And I wonder if they were actually like euphoric from
being
like
super ketotic.
Yeah. And whatever, like they always talked about clarity of mind,
Right.
peace of mind, stillness,
Right.
joy, and like they all they spun it with like a god, like this is all God.
Right.
But you kind of wonder if someone's up in the mountains and they're also cold, so
Right.
then there's like cold thermogenesis going on as well. Like you wonder if that's actually what was going on.
Right.
Like if you get into like
I think that's
higher
what's going
levels
on.
of
Right.
ketosis.
Yeah.
I actually the highest I've never
Yeah, do you measure yourself? I'm
So
actually
it's
curious.
funny.
I was going to just ask you about that.
Because I teach a trial right now at UCSF,
Okay.
at the Osher Center of Integrative Medicine, and we're taking people with diabetes, putting them on a ketogenic diet, and then we're randomizing one group to getting mindfulness training or not. And the participants in that trial need to be checking their ketones 3 times a week. So I've only been checking my ketones two times in my life. One was at a low carb conference, and I think
You have the kits shared. You want to get...
Yeah, I mean, while I'm here, I'm curious.
Okay.
Like, we'll see, because I had a bit to drink last night, so we'll see if that affected me.
It's probably going to affect you a little bit.
And so at the low carb conference, that was really funny because I was like 1.4. Then for the UCSF trial, I was like 1.5 and then 2.
Okay, legit. 'Cause I think a lot of people that I test, they're like, yeah, I eat keto. And I test their blood, they're like 0.3. I'm like,
oh, interesting.
you're not keto.
Really?
Yeah, no, because I think it's very hard to eat keto.
Oh, wow.
I think people are like, oh, I'm going to just eat like steaks and whatever. But then like a lot of the sauces have sugar.
Sauces,
right?
man. Oh, the
like,
sauces.
or you eat too much steak and like you get, you start having like the protein break down into sugar.
Yeah.
Like you got to like legit just like eat fat.
Yeah, for sure. So
So you're doing it, if you're doing like consistently above 1, that's very good.
Yeah,
It's very good.
What like Melia was telling me you chase the numbers sometime, or like what's the highest you've ever been, and how did you feel when you were that high? I'm
The highest
curious.
I've ever been is 5.5.
Oh my
That was but that was through fasting for 7 days.
That's incredible.
Yeah, that's super. Yeah, no, it's insanely high.
Did you feel euphoric? Did you find
I mean,
God? Did you find God at 5.5?
No, I did not find. I felt surprisingly sharp for not eating for 7 days. Right, like I think, like 5 years ago when I like didn't think about fasting or biohacking at all, I would have been like, dude, that's insane. You're gonna like die.
Right.
That was a very interesting week where I was like traveling. This was in January. Over 100 people in our community did a 7-day fast with us. Actually, half the team here at Human did a 7-day fast with me.
Wow.
The other half like tried and like failed after 3 days.
Yeah.
I was jet lagged
Ooh.
and tired, but I didn't need that much sleep. I was like super sharp. I was like super productive that week. And I was actually working out during that week as well.
Wow. Wow.
And I felt pretty strong actually. Like I was able to maintain a lot of my, like lifting. Yeah, it was interesting.
How was your mood?
I think like hunger tapered off at I think day 2, day 3. I think after a certain level of ketones, your appetite sort of diminishes. Yeah, I think the mood was very clear, very sharp.
Wow.
But I think at a certain point, it's like not optimal for productivity because like you're so glycogen depleted, right?
Yeah.
And I think at a certain point, you're just actually like starving and potentially like losing lean muscle tissue. So I think there's probably a balance.
Did you find yourself sensitive to like loud sounds or loud lights or just like any other things? Like, were you a little bit more sensitive to your environment?
That's a good question. I didn't necessarily pay attention to that. I don't think there's anything that popped out. No.
Okay.
But I think in terms of like general acuity, I felt like it was just sharper than normal.
Yeah. Well, I would assume that with a sharper acuity, you would be picking
More sensitive,
up on
yeah.
stuff. One of the things I noticed when I first ate keto and I felt like I was in ketosis because, number one, I felt very euphoric, but
Right.
one of the things I really remember was that I turned on the radio and
You could hear the static more.
well, when the music was playing, it was like I was feeling really overwhelmed by hearing the music. Like, it was eliciting a lot more joy inside of me than like I had never experienced.
Right.
Like my experience of my like universe changed so much so that I was like, yeah, when I listen to the radio and I hear the music, I remember telling a friend, I was like, it's like it moves me, and I've never felt that before. And I was pretty euphoric like in the initial phases. So I'm just curious, like if you experience that.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think after like fasting and being conscious about measuring ketones, I think the initial like euphoria tapered off. But I think like we've been experimenting a lot with exogenous ketones and elevating that.
Yeah.
And that sudden shift of like being from like 0 to like 4.0, 5.0.
Yeah.
You can definitely feel like a big delta there.
Yeah, for sure. I know what you mean.
Yeah.
Like, when I've tried exogenous ketones, like it does give you like some sort of boost.
Yeah.
But it could be the caffeine in that, because I'm also really a big fan of caffeine.
Yeah, well, blinded from the caffeine. I mean, I think we should talk offline. I mean, that's an active R&D area for us.
Oh, I see. Interesting.
Yeah. So we could talk offline about that. But yeah, I mean, we can obviously don't conflate with the caffeine. I mean, that's just BS, right?
Right.
But if you just take straight, I mean, there's different classes. I think we've talked with other folks about it, but there's like MCT oil, other precursors, right? That's like one class. There's ketone salts, and then ketone esters that are emerging in terms of R&D that were originally designed for military use. And there's an interesting emerging technology that may be able to bring this to scale in a form that's available for everyone soon. So
yeah, very interesting, very exciting kind of field. Who knows? I mean, as a physician kind of fighting the battle on the front line, I'm still just waiting for, the American Diabetes Association guidelines to change, or the AHA to, adapt,
what do you think what do you think are the systemic like blockers? I mean, I think it just seems like okay, this is working in clinics, like real doctors, real patients are seeing real results. Existing status quo is like not even great. It's like arguably failing.
Yes.
Where diabetes, obesity rates are up and to the right.
Yeah.
It just seems like okay, 1 + 1 is not adding up to like okay, let's evolve some of the principles that are being distributed out as like gold standard.
Totally. I completely agree with you. So number one issue is lack of education about basic macronutrient metabolism in medical schools right now. Like,
I hear that you get like 4 hours of lecture on nutrition.
I had an hour. I had 1 hour.
Over 4 years of medical school.
Yeah, I remember 1 hour, and I remember being like, that's it? And then I had 3 days of statin lectures. You know what I mean? So
I teach you about using pharmaceuticals, not food.
Big time. Yeah. And so that was, I remember being really disappointed about that as a med student. So a lot of physicians are just not educated about this, and we're in the dark. It's like you got to learn how to read if you want to write a book.
It's weird because I think 5 years ago I've been like, you guys are just like crazy hippie kind of alternative like folks, and it's like after just like actually reading this stuff and you talk to doctors and like, hey, in a lot of ways like a very just well-read layman is smarter than not all doctors, but a lot of doctors that just haven't been looking at this since like college biochemistry.
Exactly.
And it's just like, whoa, it's like the authority on this pillar is like not as crisp and clear as you might have thought.
I know. I don't know if you've interviewed Ivor Cummins yet, but you gotta.
Okay.
I mean, he's one of the most well-read people about the science behind this, and he's an engineer. He's not even a physician, but you talk to him, sometimes I have to remind myself that he's not a physician, because
he's up to speed. Like
I am having conversations with him that are like physician level conversations, and then at the end he's like, no, I'm just an engineer who's extremely well read. You should totally interview him if you have a chance. So
good. Engineers talking about medicine. Great.
He's awesome.
I'm an engineer by training as well.
He's so funny. He's a great interview. And so it wasn't until I like re-educated myself, retaught myself nutrition metabolism, that I realized what was going on. And for any physicians listening, I strongly recommend getting board certified by the American Board of Obesity Medicine or becoming a member of the ABOM, because they taught me a lot about nutrient metabolism. And they don't, like Eric Westman, I think, is the president now of the ABOM. They kind of just present the data. They're not like preaching one diet, but you can make the conclusions yourself, based off of what they teach you. They definitely helped me learn the building blocks. And then I think, there's more credibility if you're board certified in obesity medicine to like implement ketogenic diets. Right. And you can get very comfortable learning about that. So that's one way that I think we can make a difference. Another thing is that my clinical practice, I do teach medical students, and it's my way of trying to at least initiate change.
In San Francisco.
In San Francisco, yeah. So it's funny because when the med students work with me, like they know nothing about insulin. They know nothing about, they don't even know how to count carbohydrates. You know what I mean? Like they're just they've been taught nothing. And
they've been taught to prescribe drugs.
Yeah, like,
and that's how you get reimbursed by the insurance companies.
Exactly.
Like I think a lot of incentive structures are like, hey, like prescribe drugs, get paid.
Exactly.
Like insurance is not like giving you money for like taking people off meds, right?
Exactly.
Which is like this weird incentive system.
It's very challenging. So I think, teaching our youth, teaching early medical students, educating physicians, like I think there should be a law in the state of California that if you're going to practice medicine in California, you need to know some basics of nutrition.
Right.
Like, you need to know about nutritional ketosis.
Yeah.
Like, you need to know that the brain can run on ketones. You need to know that carbohydrates are not a necessary nutrient, that the body can create it, that there's other important nutrients.
It's interesting. When I talk to people, if they even know what ketones are, they're like, are ketones bad?
Isn't that bad?
Because my uncle has type 1 diabetes, and ketones are really, really bad. And it's like, okay, let's zoom back.
Exactly.
Ketones are actually produced as like a reaction to not being your body being able to use glucose. It's like a protective or like a way to fuel yourself.
Exactly. It's really funny because even before I like learned about this officially, like back in college, like as a vegetarian, I did figure out that I was like, when you eat like cakes and breads, like you gain weight pretty quickly. Like when you're eating potatoes all the time, like you put on weight.
Yeah.
And I sort of was like, I shouldn't be doing that. Like maybe I shouldn't be eating those white foods or whatever, those flour-based foods. And maybe in a way I was like just feeling my own little like low carbish, but I didn't put it together until like I actually went low carb.
Yeah.
So it's funny, like there were signs all along, and then eventually I found where I was supposed to be.
Right.
Yeah.
And then I think you think that ADA, AHA, you're gonna turn around in terms of just being okay, like let's step. I like. What do you think are the big roadblocks there? If you could just project forward a little bit.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, there's
sounds like a lot of research is coming down the pipeline. I know a lot of different groups. Sounds like you're also working on research that's showing, hey, like this is working.
Yeah, like for example, the trial I'm involved in. We're hoping that after we show those results, it'll lead to more studies, and then once you publish enough data, that's eventually what can lead to changing the guidelines. If enough physicians learn about nutrition, eventually the guidelines will change. Okay. And once the guidelines change, all physicians should change their practice. Right. Yeah. So the thing about most physicians is that they're risk averse, right? Like
it makes sense too, because
they want to play safe. Yeah.
Which is also the right thing to do, because hey, like you're playing with people's lives. Like let's make sure what is safe. Like let's be conservative, but like what is conservative is actually like not necessarily the actual best science, best practice, which is like where that tension is.
Yeah, and you know, like it's funny, like we're playing with people's lives. From my perspective, the moment I learned about the science behind low carb diets, I felt an ethical obligation to implement it in order to save people's lives. Right. You know what I mean? Like personally, like I lost my grandmother to severe complications of diabetes. You know, she had vascular dementia. It was a long and prolonged kind of process. It was very painful to see. I've lost one of my own to the fight against diabetes, you know, and I I'm not going to lose more people. You know what I mean? Like, my skin's in the game.
Right.
It's something I feel very like strongly about. So I can't wait for the ADA to change their guidelines while people are suffering. Like, it's not an option for me.
Right.
I have to do what I feel is right.
Yeah. And it's also like working for your patient.
And it's working. Yeah.
I think that's like one thing that I always found really interesting, where like nutrition is not being taught, but that's like if you look at Hippocrates, right? He was the one that defined like do no harm, but he also said like medicine is food, food is medicine.
Let food be thy medicine.
Which is like, it actually makes sense from a systems perspective, because if we're just looking at all pharmaceuticals, foods, supplements, whatever, as just inputs into that digestive system, well, like what is the most common, most ubiquitous input into our system? It's the food. Like, we're constantly manipulating ourselves with our food.
Totally.
So like, if we are just saying, hey, as doctors, don't even talk about nutrition, don't talk about food, it's only talk about drugs, you're very much focused on like a very narrow percentage of what is being input into the human system. So I think it's like not a full practice. We're just focused on a small slice of what humans are doing.
For sure. And you know what's crazy? Like, a lot of my patients, unfortunately, get really surprised when I'm sitting and going through like so much nutrition education with them. Like,
because I think people are trained to be like, drug,
pill,
done.
Yeah, it's really
it's
sad
weird. It's
if
interesting.
You think about it. Like, the fact that they are surprised, or they're extra appreciative, and
it just sounds like I feel like there's also a sense of like, oh, you're going to like woo land, like you're talking about like hippie stuff, and it's like wait, like this is not even like, we're not even talking about like spiritual weird yoga stuff. It's just like this actual biology. But I think it's like this weird tension where like, oh, you start talking about diet, it's like, oh, are you gonna be talking about some weird diet fad to me now? It's like, no, this is actually biochemistry.
I know.
You gotta change that perception.
Yeah, I know. It's like I have to remind myself that most physicians don't know how to counsel their patients about what they should be eating.
Right.
And to me, it's like, thank God I like learned about this, because I would feel very like, I'd feel almost like a fraud, like, how can you tell people how to live if you don't tell them how to? I mean, what is life, right? Eating, sleeping, fucking. Well, I don't know if I can even say that. You can bleep that out. But
hey, it's
like,
a fact of life.
Like socializing, right? So like, we as physicians need to know how to counsel on that, right? Like, medicine should be the last resort, not the first resort. Like, obviously, if there's a medical issue, like if you're sick with pneumonia and you need antibiotics, like, you need to take the antibiotics. Like, if your bone breaks, you need to get it fixed. You know what I'm saying? Like, obviously practice smart medicine, but then know the fundamentals of like health and life. So
absolutely. I think with the decentralization of information, I think if you look at the internet and computing, decentralizing computing power, right? Like IBM used to just have mainframes. Now everyone has a supercomputer in their pocket.
For sure.
You see like cryptocurrency, where it used to only be banks and governments having financial control. Now, like, everyone has like a node that can run Bitcoin. I see a lot of the biohacking community as a decentralization of healthcare knowledge.
For sure.
Where hopefully more and more people can understand and implement with the smart counsel, with right doctors to implement and manage themselves. Better,
I mean, it's crazy what's in those Reddit forums.
Yeah.
Not just for keto stuff, but like, there are like deep threads of like any topic, like, if you're having marital problems, like, or if you're trying to like raise a child, you know what I mean? Like, huge things, huge deep conversations like on Reddit, and like a lot of people depend on these things. You know what I mean? I don't know what that says about our society, that like we're not able to have frank face-to-face conversations about these issues. We have to do it in privacy. I don't know. Maybe people are more comfortable sharing, knowing that like it's their anonymous. Identity is completely gone. Probably. But we as a society like are still fairly closed off, And I don't know why that is. I don't know if it's an American thing or if now it's a thing across the world. I'm not sure. There's so many like branches to that. We could do a separate podcast.
We should definitely do a separate
that.
conversation about that. Yeah, no. What are some of the like exciting projects you're working on? So it sounds like you have a clinical trial going on. How do folks find you if they're, they listen, they're inspired by your practice? Hey, like I want to talk to, what are the shout outs here?
You can hit me up on Twitter. It's at Wali Priyanka, WaliPriyanka. That's probably the best way to reach me.
Cool. And just to wrap up here, how about your comedy practice?
Oh yeah. So
I'm actually curious to get a snapshot of that and where we could see their next show and all of that.
Yeah, for sure. So I perform in and around the Bay Area, like pretty frequently. I run a monthly free show in San Francisco at Blondie's Bar in the Mission. It's every fourth Monday of the month. It's free. It's at 8 p.m. You should come. It's recurring. It's every fourth Monday of the month.
Cool. Yeah, let's blast that information out, and then
thanks.
As always, find us on SoundCloud, but hopefully that service stays live. But if not, definitely Google Play, Apple iTunes, and YouTube. Thanks so much. See you guys next time. Cheers.
Thank you.